Korg Soundlink MW-2408, 24 channels of inputs, 8 mono, 8 stereo, that's where the 24 comes from, and 8 buses or subgroups arranged in 4 stereo pairs. And although it's 24 inputs, really is 16 channels, as you can see, 8 mono, 8 stereo. So it's better to think of it that way. All 16 channels can be directed to any of the subgroups, as you'd expect, and any combination of the subgroups, as well as the left and right, the main bus. So really you've got 5 possible destinations on every channel. And that opens up some really flexible routing, especially because, something we'll get into in a minute, especially because you can also decide whether or not each of the subgroups gets assigned or, summed to the main left-right mix or not. And the reason I mention that is because this particular mixer, although it's got some great features like the 4-band EQ, like the 4 aux ends, built-in effects, okay, I'm not too fussed about those. Comps on the first 8 channels, compressor, all the other stuff you'd expect, and that flexible routing that I've just mentioned, plus a whole bunch of digital things built in which you can use or not use. You can use it just purely analog, which is kind of how I use it. It's very hard to find a mixer that has all the inputs I like to keep things patched up. This one does it in that price range. I think it's a really, for me, a nice balance between 8 mono and 8 stereo. That covers all bases. And I use a couple of the stereo channels as returns for my effects. Some people don't like the fact that you haven't got dedicated effects returns, and I get that. It would be nice to have. But since using this way, I actually prefer to have my effects come back on a dedicated channel. We'll look at that in a minute. The main point about this mixer, the main, if you like, reason people would downvote it if they were looking at options like the Tascam Model series around the 800 to £1,000 mark. Talking about the Tascam Model 24, the Soundcraft Signature 22. What people really look for is the multi-track ability, or at least that sort of audio interface side of the mixer that allows you to patch all your equipment in and record straight into your DAW via a USB connection. Now there's obviously, various pros and cons of doing that. But the point is people love the convenience of having an assignable output in their DAW for every channel on the mixer. Of course, there's also the luxury kind of option, which is the SSL Big Six, that has similar functionality. The reason the Korg often gets downvoted, in spite of all the amazing features it does have as a mixer, it's really versatile. The reason it gets downvoted is it just has a stereo recording over USB output. Just the main bus goes out, and also there's a single USB in that can be assigned, for playing back from your DAW. But you don't get the multi-channel recording, you don't get the return summing that you can do with some of those other mixers I mentioned. But I'd argue that actually the Korg can be set up to work like that, although you need to invest also in an audio interface, ideally with 8 channels of inputs. In that configuration, that's how I've got it set up here, running into one of the older Apollo rack units. And so used, you can get these for about £1,000, I guess, these days. A bit cheaper if you're lucky. You don't have to use a universal audio unit though. You can just use, the likes of Audient and others have 8-channel, really good quality, 8-channel audio interfaces for like a third of the price or half the price, whatever. Which will act as great kind of recording back end, if you like, to your mixer front end if you decide to go for something like the Korg. Okay, so it's not an all-in-one solution, but I think because of that, it actually gives you some really nice flexibility. Okay, so I'm just going to talk you through how I've got this set up to record into my DAW via the Apollo interface. What I've got loaded up at the moment is just the universal audio kind of mixer, which they call console. And if I zoom in here, you'll see I have the 8 channels. I've basically paired them up. So I've linked them. So, and I've labeled these as mix group 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. just to correspond to the 4 stereo subgroups that come out of the Korg. So I've got these going through my patch bay, but you can just plug direct from the subgroups out at the back of the Korg. You can take, there's 2 jacks for each of these subgroups, so you can run them in stereo. You could take cables out of those straight into your interface. I've just got the patch bay in between, but basically I've got subgroup mixes going out to the patch bay from the Korg mixer 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then going into the Apollo on the corresponding channels, the Apollo inputs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that, when I hit play, that's what you'll see reflected in the mix group. So let's just start by bringing in, on the mono channels, I've got a sub mix of drums. And at the moment they're assigned to the main mix left and right. If I take those out, you'll no longer hear them on the main mix. If I assign them to subgroup 1 and 2, bring up the fader for subgroup 1 and 2, still can't hear anything, but if I assign to the main mix, okay. And at the same time, what you'll see is those subgroups coming through into the Apollo and reflected in that linked channel there. Now, if I switch those channels over to subgroups 3 and 4, and again, bring in the fader, and now assign 3 and 4 to the main mix, you'll hear it on the monitor mix. And even if I take it out of the monitor mix, because that's just what's going to the monitors, that subgroup is obviously still running through to the Apollo. So I've now also introduced a monitoring option, because if I wanted to, I could monitor direct from the Apollo or through its headphones, hear what's coming in through the inputs. And obviously you can see again now, because I've switched to the subgroup source on the mixer, it's now coming through mix group 2 as reflected both on the hardware and the software. And so if I was working in my DAW, like Live or whatever you use, I would just be selecting the relevant audio interface input for whatever is coming through. If I turn the monitoring back on, turn the main mix back up, I'm now going to play a different sound source. So just you can hear it, I've got a Mellotron which is coming in on, let me check, yeah, channel 6. Just turn those drums a bit, down a bit. Okay, you can hear that, just turn the volume up a bit. Needs a bit of gain, channel 6. Okay. And that again, at the moment, if I turn the drums off, is just assigned to, it's hard to see on here, but left and right, which is the main mix. Now, I've got a Zen delay on aux attached to aux send 3 out of the mixer. So, and it's returning into channel 19. Yeah, channel 1920 there. So you can't hear the delay at the moment because 1920 isn't assigned to anything. If I put it in the main mix, just so you can hear the delay coming back. So you see I have fader control over that delay. But of course what I can also do, if say we have our drums running, assign those to groups 1 and 2, put 1 and 2 into the mix, so we can monitor it. There you go. So that's just controlling the drums. That's the drum submix. Now let's say we want our effects running through subgroup mix 3/4. Fine. Okay, so I'm going to assign my Zen delay channel for 3 and 4. I'm going to switch that into the main mix so we can hear what's coming out of it. Now, as well as the channel volume, we now have it as a subgroup. So if we, for instance, to add in another effects return, I happen to have the DP4, which is sending via aux4, if I remember correctly. So we could potentially add some of the drums mix to aux4. See what happens when we bring that in. We're going to assign that to okay. So there's the dry drums. They're assigned to group 1 and 2. 3 and 4, we've got our effects. So now that I'm sending to aux4 quite a good amount of both drum channels into that phaser preset on the DP4, I'm going to bring that in, assign to 3/4, and then bring in the group. Now, if I hit the mellotron again through the Zen delay, so you can see for recording purposes, we're starting to break our channels down into relevant groups. And you can assign these in any combination you want. But, you know, for me, an obvious thing might be something like drums, FX, synths, and instruments, and then maybe something like bass. Or maybe if you're using a vocal stem or something out of a sampler, you might have something for vocals. And if I just switch the phaser to group 5/6 instead and assign that, so we can still hear it. And then you can now hear drums on mix group 1. You can hear the long echo coming through mix group 2. And you can hear the phaser coming through mix group 3. Okay, so now I've explained the basic concept of routing the channels through the groups and the groups into an interface like the Apollo. I'm now going to just take it one step further, open up live. Open up the audio MIDI setup, because if you've got a Mac like me, it's very easy to create an aggregate device just by going here. I've already done this one, as you can see, Korg and Apollo, which just combines the outputs of both machines ins and out into one device. You can then select in Ableton from your preferences, which I've done. And I've just set it up to make it obvious which channels are which. These are all audio tracks that have just been assigned to the relevant incoming signals. So if I hit play on the drum machine and get the signal coming through channels 3 and 4, which I am then, as before, sending to 1 and 2, coming through that group, you can see that's in the first Apollo recording channel. And just by switching channels on here, I can just by switching the channels on the mixer, it's now being routed through the next Apollo pair into the DAW. And similarly, if I play the mellotron, which is coming in through channel 6, and that is already routed to that subgroup that feeds Apollo channels 3, 4, whereas the let's switch the Zen delay to channels 5, 6, and so that's the delay signal coming in there. So that's how to kind of complete the process in the software, if you like. And obviously, once you've got that set up, you can just save that as a template, and you are good to go with 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry, I didn't explain actually. If we just backtrack slightly, let's just get those drums going again. I'm just gonna put them through the main mix. So I'm actually going to send those to take them off the subgroups, send them both sides to the left and right. So we're just controlling this now through the bus. None of these groups active at the moment. And obviously what you can see now is it's routing through the USB cable from the back of the Korg straight into the DAW. So in fact, if I switch the Apollo off now, it's going to have no impact. I mean, we'll lose our Apollo inputs, obviously, but we're just hearing the master. The same if I put the mellotron channel back up, assign to left, right, play something, and in fact, let's add the Zen delay channel back into that main left, right mix. We should hear. Just turn the drums down a little bit. Yeah, so that's everything now coming through that single USB. Now obviously the whole point of this is you can break up the channels, but what I'm trying to show you is you've got 5 multi-track recording destinations when you pair up the Korg with an 8-channel audio interface. So I'm hoping what people realize is that actually it's quite easy to overcome what is honestly a limitation. They should have put the multi-track straight into this, but it also comes with some advantages, because obviously if you're tracking your groups, recording your groups through from the mixer, you're keeping the analog signal fully intact until it hits the Apollo. And of course you can also use the other benefits of Apollo recording software, like the low latency plugins as you record, etc., which you wouldn't get using any of these mixers on their own if you're recording USB straight into your computer. So just in summary, what you can see is that using this in combination with the Apollo actually gives you very flexible routing via the group outs, which for me kind of compensates really nicely for the fact that it doesn't have the individual outs on every channel. Okay, it's not as flexible or convenient as like the Tascam Model does, but it does have more channels and certainly more stereo channels.